Hi, welcome back to the channel. I'm Michelle, and today I want to share with you my kids' experience with taking the MAP growth test. So if you're new to my channel, I have 3 children. I have a 4-year-old doing preschool, a 7-year-old doing first, second grade work, and an 11-year-old who was in 5th grade. So I'm going to answer a couple questions about it before I get into my thoughts on MAP growth. So the first one is, why am I standardized testing my kids now? So my oldest has taken standardized tests before. She did public school K through 2nd grade, so she took one in kindergarten, she took one in 1st grade. I don't believe they took a standardized test in 2nd grade because of COVID, but she has experience in the past doing that, and they did it multiple times throughout the year, 3 I believe, so you get a fall one, mid-year, and end of the year. And of course, I would always get the parent, printout. I wouldn't get the actual teacher to show all the details. But she has experience with that in the past, but I have not standardized tested my kids since that. And my 7-year-old has never taken a standardized test, and my 4-year-old isn't old enough yet. So this is only about my 7-year-old, my 11-year-old's experience with it. So why not? Well, for a couple of reasons. My oldest, when she came from the public school, so we started homeschooling in 3rd grade, I noticed she had some pretty substantial math gaps. And we've been working really hard to fill those gaps over these past 3 years of homeschooling. So I really wanted to check to make sure those gaps have been filled. And especially with my oldest, she struggles with math because of that experience. And I want to make sure she's at where she should be. Now, she did for 5th grade, she did Dimensions 4. And I wanted to see where she was compared to her peers. I think that's really important, especially going into middle school. She will be in 6th grade next year, which I guess that depends on where you are. Where I live, and growing up, 6th grade was the beginning of middle school. I know some people don't think middle school starts till 7th grade, so that can be different. For me, she's entering her middle school years. I want to make sure she's on track, because the thing about middle school is you have to put certain things in place for them to be ready for things at high school level. So I want to make sure she's on track. Also, we've been using a lot of our curriculum. We haven't made a lot of switches over the years, so we've used the same math curriculum, we've used the same language arts curriculum. I want to see if that's working the way I think it's working. I think it's very important to have check marks or benchmark checks for both the teacher and the student, because it's very easy as the teacher, educator / parent to be too close to the situation and not really see those gaps, especially if you haven't worked with kids in the past and this is your first attempt at teaching a child. It's very easy to miss things because you don't have that trained eye, or you just simply don't have the experience yet. And that's okay. That's why I think it's important to have check marks for us. So my daughter has done well with Dimensions. I mean, it's not easy. She does struggle with it sometimes, but we persevere through that. But I want to make sure that what's reflecting in her work, what I'm seeing her do, is translating to a third-party test. I think it's important to have that outside view looking in, especially since we've used the curriculum hasn't changed over the years. I want to confirm that what I think is working and what I'm seeing is what's happening, because I was reading Kitchen Table Homeschool book, and I'll link up above. I made a review on that book, and they were talking about how their child had done Dimensions, done well on the test, everything, and then they did the test and noticed that there was these gaps, conceptual gaps that their child was missing, and that they had to make a switch. And I don't think you should make a switch necessarily based on your results. I think one of the best pieces of advice I got from a fellow homeschooler was, the results should show where your child is level-wise with that curriculum. So my daughter finished 4 this last year, so I would expect her to, at the very minimum, test at a 4th grade level, if not higher. If she doesn't, then I know that something's not going right. Same with language arts. I had no concerns with her with language arts. That's her preferred area. So that wasn't a concern for me, but it was a concern for my 7-year-old, who has struggled with language arts and reading in particular. And we've been, troubleshooting that area for a couple years, but we've used the same consistent curriculum, like I've said, and I want to see, is she at level for her peers, her age group? Is there something I'm missing? These tests will help kind of pinpoint weaker areas or gaps, which are really important as the educator. I think, it can be a little nerve-wracking because this is kind of showing how well you've done teaching your child. And that can be, we don't often have a lot of accountability in homeschooling. There's no one really checking to make sure we're doing what we say we're doing. I think it's important that we have those checks in for ourselves to really make sure we are reaching the bar we are, setting for ourselves. So that is why I chose this year, mainly for my oldest, because I'm prepping for middle school and high school. I want to make sure she's on track. I want to check to see if there's any gaps, if the curriculum is working the way I'm anticipating it and seeing it work in real life. So the next question is, why the MAP growth test? And the simple answer is because that's the test my oldest was familiar with. It's what they use. They use a version of it in the public school system. So she's familiar with the format. I do like that it's adaptive. I think it's affordable through Homeschool Boss. I love the reports you get at the end, the kind of details, all of the information. And also it gives you resources that if they're weaker or a suspected gap in that area, it gives you resources to practice that area, which I'll show you in a little bit. So when I'm talking about our experience with MAP growth testing, I'm not going to share my kids' score. So if you're new to my channel, I don't share that kind of personal information about my kids. I don't share their names, and I don't think they would feel comfortable with me sharing their actual scores. So this is for privacy reasons. I have no problem sharing, where they scored, but I'm not going to show you their, printouts or anything like that. I think that's kind of a breach of their privacy. So just a heads up with that. But our experience using the MAP test was really good. So I was able to schedule it. They took it the last week of May because that was we do the Sabbath schedule, 6 weeks on, 1 week off. So we did the last week of May. So they didn't have scheduled school. They just had their standardized testing. So for my 11-year-old, she did the math, she did the language arts reading, and she did the language arts usage. So looking at things like grammar, punctuation, writing. For my 7-year-old, I just did the math and reading, and again, my 4-year-old isn't old enough to standardize test yet. But filling out the information was really easy. I got to choose my time slot. It worked well for us. That we got emails ahead of time of how to prepare to make sure the computers had the software that they needed. So just make sure the latest edition of Google Chrome or whatever you're using. And my kids did use different computers. They took it at the same time, which I think was important because I scheduled it around my 4-year-old's rest/nap time, so it would be really quiet in the house. I also had headphones, noise-canceling headphones available for the kids if they needed that. So my 7-year-old was on my Mac desktop, so it's a big screen, and she's familiar with how to use the mouse, how to use the keyboard. She's really into coding, so she's chose that computer. My 11-year-old has my husband's old laptop, and I don't know the brand of it, but it's a touch screen. So she chose to use the touchscreen laptop for hers. Again, you get an email from Homeschool Boss about how to set things up. I really liked that they had practice tests. And again, I'm not so concerned about my kids practicing the material ahead of time. I know in public school, they spend a lot of time prepping the kids for these types of tests. I know some homeschoolers even buy like Spectrum workbooks and things. I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to prep them. I want to have kind of a raw score of where they are, what can they remember, what did they retain. I don't want to mess with the scores by prepping them ahead of time. So I do like that it had the practice tests to get them familiar with the format and the different tools, especially with my older, she has a set of tools she can use, like an eraser and to do work on the computer types things. So I do enjoy that was, so a couple days before the test, I had them try out the practice test. I had it, going on their computers to make sure there was no glitch issues and that the pop-up ads were disabled so that things would come through fine. The day of the test, I called in my appointed time, gave my name, they gave me the information for each child, their different logins, and that was it. The following days, they would just text me, and that is something that when you sign up, there's a little box that says, are you okay receiving text messages? I clicked that because it's easier than calling in every day. So they would text message me the login information for each child, and they were always there available through text or talking on the phone if I had any issues, which I didn't. So it was a very easy process as far as that went. So the actual test, so I had my kids do math first. Math was on Tuesday. So my 11-year-old did math on Tuesday, my 7-year-old did math at the same time. So to give you an idea, because when you finish the test, there is a rough printout for you that shows you kind of the range that they should score in for each area. So for my 11-year-old, it was operations and algebraic thinking, numbers and operations, measurement, data, geometry. So they're given a goal range to score in, and then they're given their goal score. So it gives you a rough estimate. The following day, I did get the really long report that details the different areas of those that I mentioned. So for my 11-year-old, for the 5th grade test, she took 40 minutes to complete. There's a timestamp on here. And she didn't think it was hard. She thought it was pretty easy. I did, tell my kids ahead of time that it's an adaptive test, so there are questions on there they won't know the answers to, and that's completely fine, that it's gonna get harder the more they answer, and that's okay. I also did prep them saying, this isn't a test, this is a review of the year to show me what we need to work on next year, and if there's any things we need to fill on. So really putting it more on, it's coming off on me, not necessarily did they do good or bad. So my 7-year-old, I tested her on the 1st grade level because, again, she's on different levels with math and reading, but I really wanted to compare her to her peers. So I chose to test her in 1st grade, and she had the exact same groupings, so numbers, operations, measurements, data. She's given the same goal range, but for her age group, obviously. And then you get that raw score when she finished. She took 30 minutes for her math test, and it read it to her, which was good because she's not that much of a fluent reader to read that many questions. I believe it's 43, 44 questions for the math portion. But again, my 7-year-old said it was really easy as well. And as far as my 11-year-old, coming from Dimensions word problems, I think anything is easy compared to that, but they did fine. Next was reading. So we did math on Tuesday, Wednesday was reading. My 11-year-old was tested in these different groupings for the reading: literary text, informational text, and vocabulary. Again, she's given that goal range to aim with and that raw score, and then what she scored. So for the language arts reading test for my 11-year-old, she took 35 minutes. For my 7-year-old, which again, testing different group areas. My 7-year-old was tested in foundational skills, language and writing, literature and informational text, vocabulary use and functions. She took 40 minutes, which makes sense because she struggles more with reading, so that one took her longer than the math. But again, they both said it went really well. And then the last day, my 11-year-old took the language usage. So the groups are writing, so write, revise text for purpose, language, understand, edit for grammar usage, and language, understand, edit for mechanics, so things like punctuation. And she took 21 minutes for that test. So the next question is, do I think the results my kids got fit where I thought they were, my perception of them? And I would say it was pretty spot on. So my 11-year-old, like I said, I was not concerned at all with the language arts. That's the area she excels in. She scored advanced in those areas. But one thing I think it did point out really well, because she had all these, advanced scores, but in the one area, and the reason I did the language arts usage is because she does writing for IEW, so I wasn't concerned about that. She does grammar with Michael Click Thompson, so I wasn't concerned with that. And again, both areas she scored really high in, but something she scored below, or low, I believe, because you're given below average, low, medium, above average, advanced. You're getting this kind of scale. And the only thing she scored low in or below grade level, was editing for mechanics So punctuation, which again is something I've noticed in her writing. She has a very good literary voice. IEW has made her a really good writer, but now she needs to hone in on the punctuation, the colon, parentheses, quotations. She really needs to work on that more. And that was really important information for me to get, that at this age, she should be focusing more on that, and that's something we need to address for next year. So I found that really helpful. The rest was, I knew that she was, vocabulary was advanced, all those things. That was not a surprise for me. Math was one of the things I was concerned with her because, again, something she struggled with, something she had gaps with in the past. And she scored at grade level, so the medium range. So exactly where a fifth grader ending their fifth grade year should score, which kind of surprised me since we were doing Dimensions 4, but I guess it makes sense because people say Dimensions is often advanced compared to other curriculums. But I would say that looking at her final report, the things she missed were questions we haven't gone over yet in Dimensions. So she missed questions relating to angles and like acute angle, and then measurements, so some of the geometry components of that we just haven't gotten into yet. And then that's a good sign for me that the things that we have learned, and even in fifth grade, even though she's doing level 4 in Dimensions, she's had that conceptual foundation. She scored really well in all those areas, that she's exactly where she's supposed to be. Dimensions is doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing. We've managed to fill those gaps that she had from her previous public school education. We're on the right road. And though Dimensions can sometimes be a struggle, she's fully capable of doing that. And this is exactly what that test is telling me, that she's capable of it. She's doing really well. It's sticking, she's retaining the information, and she's able to take that information and apply it to math problems. So I was extremely happy to see that what I thought was working was in fact working really well for her. So my 7-year-old, I expected her to score really well in math. She did. She scored high in math, which doesn't surprise me. That's the area that comes really easy to her. It's funny, we were doing 3-digit addition today with regrouping, and I kept trying to get the kid to write the problems down so you could see the ones and tens and hundreds column. Now she was doing it all mentally, and she was getting the right answer, and she was able to regroup and hold that information in her head, which I found astounding because I can't even hold that kind of information in my head. I have to write 3-digit addition problems out with regrouping. But that showed me that, in fact, I do know that she's advanced in that area, and she scored advanced in all those different areas I was talking about. For reading, so 7-year-old, how did she do with reading as a struggler? So she scored exactly where she should for a kid finishing first grade, which makes complete sense because she's at different levels with math and reading. So she's definitely more entering towards a 3rd grade level in math, while she's entering a 2nd grade level in reading, which again, I already knew and felt that way about, so this was kind of confirming what I already knew. And she did well, and it's funny that she scored low in, I believe it was kind of fundamentals. So she has trouble picking out certain phonetic sounds, which is something we've been working on, something I'm aware of, something that her working memory, she can hold all this math, but when it comes to phonetic sounds, she struggles with, and we're working on that. But she scored advanced in vocabulary and comprehension. So with a child that struggles with reading, how is she scoring really high in this, but below in fundamentals? Well, some of that, the below, is her ADHD and her ability to focus, and that's something I'm aware of that we're addressing already. But how does she score high in vocabulary and comprehension? Well, keep in mind, what are we using for that? We are using core knowledge, and we've used core knowledge the last couple years, so it's really built upon itself, and something I've realized about looking into working memory, how the brain works, ADHD, things like that, that her ability to hold on to things in working memory isn't as great, but if she's given more contextual knowledge, so background knowledge to kind of sync it up in her brain, it's easier for her brain to find that neural pathway because it can connect to other things already in existence. And that's exactly what core knowledge has done for her. It's provided a great deal of background knowledge. There's vocabulary in core knowledge as well. Not to mention the fact that she does group subjects with us, which are mostly aimed towards my 11-year-old. So I would expect her vocabulary to be higher just because of the resources that we use and the content she's exposed to. It's not, if she was my oldest, she probably wouldn't be exposed to as much. But I think that's a really good point, that core knowledge is doing exactly what I need it to do. Although she struggles with phonetics, the other area, comprehension, which is big in core knowledge, background knowledge, vocabulary, is so high that it makes it able for her to compensate for her weaker areas and actually helps her long term, which I think is a great example of, what I've been reading and seeing it in action, that, she will have this struggling working memory issue, but if I raise up her background knowledge and give her things to link up to, it's going to help her with her reading. So again, it was confirming something I was aware of, but it was really cool to see how core knowledge really played into that. So the next question is, and then for language usage, so grammar, my daughter scored high in, writing high in. The thing she scored lower in was editing, which I've already talked about that. So mechanics, something that I will have to address in future years, and something we are currently working on. Right now we're working on Editor-in-Chief, which is really showing us, to work more on that. She's a good writer, but we gotta get the mechanics down. So the next question is, did I show my kids their scores? And I guess yes and no. So for my 7-year-old, I just told her she did really well. I mean, she doesn't, if I could show her the graphs and everything that come up, but she doesn't really care. She's just like, oh, it was fun, and then that was it. So I just said she did really well, and that was it. For my 11-year-old, I did, what is going on here? For my 11-year-old, I did show her results in math. And why I did that, because she struggles with it. And I think a lot of it has to do with a lot of it has to do with her mindset around math, because she struggled and had a difficult experience in the public school system with math, that showing her that she is exactly where she's supposed to be, that she is actually pretty good in math, especially with compared to other kids in her grouping, and that there were certain skills, like her algebra skills were really good, and it was just the key areas missing in those geometry, like angle measurements, things like that, we haven't gone over. So I wanted to kind of reinforce to her that what we're doing is working, and she's learning, and she did really well, and she'd be really proud of herself, and to kind of give her that confidence that I think she naturally lacks in math, because it's in her head that she's bad at it, and that could have come from a lot of different sources, but we're trying to, that growth mindset, that she did really well. So that's the only reason I showed her that information, so she can kind of have a confidence boost. I also told her she did really well in language arts, but again, nobody's surprised with that. And then with mechanics, we can kind of see as we're working through Editor-in-Chief, she needs some more reinforcement in that area. So I think it was a really positive experience. So what I did with the reports that came the next day is I took my notebook and I wrote out each kid, and then the reports will give you, kind of areas they're weaker in or could use some additional work in, and then there's a column that shows you potential gaps, so something you need to address. So I wrote those things down, and I wrote for each kid areas to work on and areas that we haven't done. So if it's an area we need to work on, I start it, and I would show you my paper, but it's got my kid's name on. So for example, for my 11-year-old, something she needs to work on is adding and subtracting fractions. So we need to do a little more review of that. I think we're kind of already hitting the review of that with Math Mammoth. I talk about that in her summer plans, that we've introduced Math Mammoth review, grade level review, every day to kind of work on some of those skills, because I think she knows it. She just needs a little bit more practice with it. She needs to work on double-digit multiplication, and that's just because she knows how to do it, but she's rushing and she's missing a step, or she's not adding one of the columns right or something like that. So again, just a little more repetitive practice. And then I have a column of things haven't done, so things we haven't covered: ratios, angles, so acute, obtuse, volume, identifying triangles, isosceles, right triangles, that, and plotting vertices, so x, y, that type of thing. Again, those are things that we will cover with 5th grade dimensions that I don't have to really worry about supplementing or additional resources for that. But the other side, adding and subtracting fractions and multiplying double-digit numbers, is something I've already worked in some supplemental review for that. And then for my 7-year-old, the same thing. I had a work on column, so potential areas she just needs a little extra practice in, and then an area we haven't done. So things my 7-year-old has to work on is skip counting. She knows her 5s, 10s, but she needs to do 2s and 3s. She needs a little more work on clocks and a little more work on coins. But other than that, she did really well. Things we haven't done is she needs more help with solving problems with using data tables. And I think we briefly covered that in dimensions, but haven't really gone into reading graphs and that. But again, supplementing already, the Math Mammoth review is bringing that in, those things I talked about: clocks, coins, and she even has, I know she did a data table this past week in the Math Mammoth review. So I'm already supplementing things before we took this test, but this test shows me that yes, the areas I thought they needed review in or more help were correct, and I'm on the right path. And that's so important to know you were on the right path in homeschooling. And also to show you that, you know, not constantly curriculum swapping, and, you know, sticking the path, being intentional with the things you buy and really doing the research instead of buying the next shiny thing. Making sure ahead of time that you're picking what's right for the child in front of you, not the child you think you have. When you do those things, it sets you on the right path. And this test showed me that, yes, in fact, what I'm doing is working for my kids, and to keep it up. So for reading, again, there was nothing for my 11-year-old that she needed to work on besides that punctuation, the editing mechanics. Everything else she was good at. For my 7-year-old, for reading, some of the things we haven't talked about is more grammar stuff, which again, I talked about how I'm bringing in first language lessons next year, or, you know, we'll start this summer when she finishes up Core Knowledge Grade 2. So I'm already have plans for bringing in more grammar, and then things she can just work on is decoding those words, so syllable sounds or syllable division, decoding phonetic sounds, which again, we've already have things in place to help with that. So that is what I did. And then I'm going to show you really quick the resources that you get when you get your reports. So this shows you what are those reports. This is for my 7-year-old in math, I believe. Yes, math. So this shows you areas that could use supplementation, and this shows you areas that could be potential gaps. So when you click on this, what's really cool, this little blue thing, and it tells you kind of the Common Core where it should be aligned. So it brings you to this. So worksheets, workbooks, lesson plans, and games. So these are worksheets you could print out to help with some of those areas that they scored in needing more supplemental work or potential gaps, which is really cool. And then potential lesson plans, so maybe to reiterate the information that they didn't understand. And then this part, games, different games they can play that will help work on those areas that they need help in. So I thought that was a really cool feature. And then, so for example, this one, same thing, you get different worksheets you can print out, different lesson plans, so skip counting, and then different games. And the same thing was true for my 11-year-old. So for example, this is her learning statement, and this is where you find the information, the learning statement. Click at some of these. So same thing, different worksheets to work on those areas, different lesson plans. different workbook. I found that in this age level, there's less games. But same thing, worksheets, lesson plans, workbook. And it will tell you in the report, areas to work on, kind of their most missed questions. So that was our experience using the MAP growth test. This is something I plan on using in future years, especially now that my daughter's hitting those, middle school years. And frankly, I don't have to keep portfolios in the state I homeschool in. I don't have to turn anything in. I don't have to do anything in the state I live in to homeschool. But my kids do always have the option of going back to public school if they so choose to, and I'm completely fine with that. And honestly, I think between showing, the school district my portfolio that I make or showing them MAP test scores, I think they'd probably be more interested in the MAP test scores. So I do keep their MAP test printouts in their portfolio, and we'll do that for every year from here. But I think it is a good check for if anybody wants information in the future of what we did, or if they're at where they're supposed to be, I have that proof that I can put in their information as well. But we had a really positive experience. I spent $115 for my two kids to take. My 11-year-old, again, took the math, reading, and the language usage. My 7-year-old took the math and the reading. I didn't feel the need to add science. Science and language uses were only an extra $10 added on because my kids have covered so much science, both my 7-year-old with Core Knowledge Language Arts, because there's science units within there, and they both done group science since we've homeschooled in 3rd grade and on, and that I'm pretty sure that they are more than proficient in the science, considering the local public school doesn't even really start science until 5th grade by me. So I did not feel the need to test in science, but perhaps in future years, maybe before my daughter gets into high school, science would be a good one to test for her to see where she's at. But I think it was a really good diagnostic tool for homeschooling. And again, I think, take it with a grain of salt, because these areas, there are 43, 44 questions. Is that going to necessarily give you this, really elaborate idea of how your homeschooling is? No. But is it going to give you a broad overstroke of it? Yes. And it's important to focus in on certain areas that you could potentially be missing. I think it is a helpful tool for that reason. And I think it's good to have both that check and accountability for myself and for my students to make sure everyone's where they should be, and if we're not, what can we do to remedy that? So use it as a tool, not that you're failing as an educator or you're not learning as a student, but okay, if there's these gaps or these weaker areas, what can we do going forward? So if you have any specific questions about MAP growth testing, again, this is our first year doing it, so I am no means an expert, but we had a really positive experience. I think it really was spot on for both my kiddos, and it's something we plan on incorporating in years to come. Thank you for watching.